Doctor Dude. Oh no.
All right. Yeah, hello. Um, I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Gode, and then I am part of the ECOP webinar hub, and then we do the monthly webinars. I'm very happy to be, and we are privileged to be joined by Dr. Arthur for today's webinar. So I will just do, I mean, people are still joining now, but we can for sure start already. Just a little introduction. Like I already said, my name is Godi, and I'm part of the ECOP webinar hub. For those who are not familiar with the ECOP program, the ECOP program is the UN Ocean Decade endorsed um, program that is focused on youth capacity building, so early career ocean professionals, and it's a global program. As at today, there are about 168 countries that have engaged one way or the other with the ECO program, and there are more than 60 regional and national nodes. So it's very amazing to see if uh, you are if you already have a national or regional node where you're from, then that is amazing. You can, of course, you have the opportunity to work with the national or the regional node there. You can engage with a lot of other early career ocean professionals. But if there is none currently in your country, if you don't have a national node, uh, this even presents you a bigger or a better opportunity, right, to become a national coordinator of the ECO program. Just reach out to us. We will help you with all the guidance to establish a national node. Again, thank you for joining today's webinar. And we have on the 50th series, so we've done a lot of different webinars in the past, and this is the 50th one, and it's focused on Africa and then the UN Ocean Decade of Sciences. So we are joined by the expert, the executive director of WIOMSA, Mr. Dr. Arthur Tuda, and he will be taking us through the presentation for today. Feel free to post your questions or comments in the chat or in the question and answer tab. And then also, if you have any questions you would want to ask by speaking, then at the end, we would open the floor for some interactive engagement. Thanks again. Dr. Arthur, please.
All right, great. Can
Right.
you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so ready to go?
Yes.
All right. Let me just share my screen. Right. So like, just confirm if you can see my screen from your side. Um, confirm if you can see from my screen. All right, great. All right, so as has been introduced, I'm Arthur Tudor. I'm from the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, WIOMSA. WIOMSA is an organization that is established to bring together scientists from the Western Indian Ocean region. That is countries of Kenya, Somalia, Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, and the islands of the Indian Ocean. Those include Mauritius, Madagascar, Comoros, Reunion, and Seychelles. So WIOMSA was established way back in 1995. And our main goal really is to support science in this region, which we've been doing for 30 years. We're also involved in supporting policy development, which is science-led, and also capacity building for ocean governance. So you can describe our work as cutting across science, policy, and capacity development. My background is in fisheries sciences. So I started as a fisheries scientist. I've worked in marine protected areas in Kenya for the last, for 20 years or so, from 2001 up to 2021, before I joined WIOMSA as executive director. So my experience mainly has been in marine conservation management, but also the science supporting marine conservation management. So my presentation today really is about Africa and the Ocean Decade. I'm sure by now we all know what the decade is about. We are right in the middle or past the middle point of the decade. We are in 2026. The decade of ocean science, as we all know, was supposed to promote the development and growth of ocean science and to transform ocean science during this decade. And so the UN felt that it's important to dedicate this whole decade to ocean science. And so my talk today is really about where Africa sits in this whole subject of the ocean decade. And where are we currently, and where did we come from? And the question is, are we making progress? Are we contributing effectively to the decade of ocean science? So basically, it will revolve around those key elements. And to start us off, really, it's important to understand that Africa is an island, if you like, an ocean continent. If you look at the map of Africa, many of us think that Africa is just a big landmass of forests, mountains, rivers, lakes, and of course, great people. But sometimes we don't think of ourselves as an ocean continent. But if you look at the map of Africa and the world, we are actually surrounded by the ocean all around us. So more than 30 coastal states and island states are bordering the ocean, whether it's the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, or the Mediterranean Sea. We are all surrounded by ocean. And 30,000 kilometers of ocean coastline goes around Africa. So that's a huge coastal zone, if you like. And so that alone just tells us that as Africa, we must make, or the ocean has to be a priority for us, because our ocean landmass is probably bigger than the land mass that we have. So the ocean space, rather, is bigger than the land mass that Africa has. So we should really think of ourselves as an ocean continent. We have got great, huge, exclusive economic zones, and millions of our communities and societies are dependent on the ocean for many years. Okay, and most of the coastal and marine areas of Africa contribute immensely to fisheries and biodiversity, as you all know. So that's the reality about Africa, that sometimes we don't want to, or we forget rather, that we are first and foremost an ocean continent, and that should make the ocean a key subject in our discussions when we talk about science. Yeah, so there was a global assessment that was released in 2020. And it was the basis really for setting up the goals and objectives for the decade. But this report, if probably some of you have read it, it served as an early warning system for Africa's ocean governance and science landscape. But the report did not simply highlight environmental risks. It exposed really deep structural weaknesses in how knowledge, leadership, and capacity were organized in Africa. what emerged strongly there was the fragmentation as the central problem for Africa ocean science. So Africa ocean science was really fragmented. It showed us that there were too many isolated projects. So we are having projects that are going on in ocean science and research, but these are isolated projects that are often fragmented, have very little integration, and in many cases were duplicated or duplicative efforts. So you'll find projects that are similar across probably small geographies or countries are basically duplicating what other projects are doing without being aware that there's possibility for integration. Okay. Another thing that came out of the report was the dependency of Africa, with the knowledge production and setting of agenda still being concentrated in the global north. So while we were doing a lot of research, we still depend heavily on the leadership provided by the global north. African scientists, the report says that we participated a lot in many global events, or we are participating still in many global events, but leadership is limited and there's still power asymmetries. So we are doing a lot of work and research and science, but this research is not designed by Africans. It is not led by Africans. It is still mostly led by the global north. This report also a very weak transition of science into policy. So a lot of knowledge exists. We publish a lot, often in very high quality journals, but we see that the action lags behind because we don't have clear institutional pathways between production of evidence and decision making. So we are very good at producing knowledge, but this knowledge does not end up in informing our decisions. But a particularly troubling insight was the capacity paradox. While there are training opportunities, chart a way forward as Africa. So the whole message here is that without systematic redesigning of Africa's ocean science, we still have a high risk of not moving forward. And so my presentation really looked at what this report revealed. But the bigger question is, how effective have we been in addressing some of these gaps that the report sort of identified? So as I said, later on after this report in Africa, we did our own assessment that was led by WIOMSA and Indian Ocean, the IOC Africa. That was around 2021. And the report was titled Ocean Decade Africa Roadmap. The whole point was to design a roadmap for Africa and to try and address some of the questions that were identified in the ocean report. And this report sort of reinforced the findings of the ocean report. It still found fragmented institutions. Funding was not available in many cases. It was donor-funded projects. Science policy connections were weak. Capacity existing, but it's not utilized. Leadership, Africa is not leading in any way in ocean science. So this report exists. The two reports actually are found on the Decade websites. If you want, you can look for them and read them. But they found similar problems for Africa ocean science. So let's say that was before or just about the time the Decade of Science was starting. And so in the last 5 years, what have we done, really? That is a question that I think we need to address going forward. So an important thing is that, as I said, is that we are really doing a lot as Africa. We are doing quite some good work in ocean science. We are participating in a lot of processes that are ocean science related. Okay. But we still have a fundamental problem in that we are involved so much in activities that give us a lot of visibility, but not necessarily build resilience of our systems. So we look very productive. We have a lot of workshops, strategies, pilot projects, donor-funded initiatives, international visibility. But these elements create an illusion of strength. So we look that, it's basically an illusion of strength. In reality, many systems that we have are still fragile because they're still centralized. We still have weak coordination mechanisms. Learning is not promoted. We are still very siloed. So even if you go in research institutions, you'll find that we still run as departments. So there's department of oceanography, department of fisheries, a department of ecosystems, and we rarely integrate our programs. So you can imagine, even at institutional level, things are fragmented. What about at national and regional level? So that's part of the problem that the decade attempted to resolve. So, and in many cases, our institutions of research of ocean science depend on personalities rather than durable governance structures, which means that progress can stall when these people leave. So we've seen that in many of our institutions that, research and science depend on individuals, and when they leave, everything sort of shuts down. An important part is also the local legitimacy that is very inconsistent. So with communities, when you do research with communities, they're treated more as beneficiaries and rather than co-designers. So what I'm trying to say here is that our systems are optimized for visibility. We want to create a lot of visibility, but on what we report, what was launched, what has been showcased, many conferences, but we don't have a system that functions in terms of ocean science in Africa generally. So for me, the important question is can we develop a system that can adapt, learn, and improve when things become tougher or when things change? Okay, so that is what comes out in the way we do our ocean science at the moment. Yeah, so what must we not do as Africa? We must not stick to old rigid systems. So some of our institutions are as old as when we got independence, and they were not designed really to promote science for Africans. They were designed to basically generate knowledge, and a lot of it is kept at the universities and not utilized at all. We have PhDs, professors, and all this, but the systems have not changed in 60 years. They remain the same. What we need now is to connect Africa and focus on learning, a learning system, as opposed to, these fragmented, isolated, country-focused, institutional-based approaches. And what will drive the decade for Africa is regional cooperation. We must connect our knowledge from the north to the south to the east. We must work together to produce solutions, create systems that help us to learn and think together, apply adaptive systems. So our institutions must be redesigned to meet the realities of the current ocean needs. At the moment, we are not there yet, as you can attest in some of the institutions where we work in. Yeah, so the decade came in to sort of help us to, restructure ourselves. So the arrival of the ocean decade marked it was quite a profound shift. So rather than positioning ourselves, or rather the decade, instead of looking at itself as another funding mechanism or project pipeline, it reframed the whole question of ocean science. The focus now moved from asking who was the best project, and we started looking at the system as a whole. So when the decade was launched, a lot of people also thought that the decade was here to give us money and to fund projects. No, but the reality is that this is a shift that was good for Africa. The first time, the emphasis was on coordination, alignment, and a collective architecture rather than isolated excellence, the way things have been running. So the decade actually came to help us to design regional roadmaps, helped us to look at shared visions that transcend our boundaries. The decade came to help us coordinate, create more platforms for dialogue, like ECOPS is one of the platforms that the decade came to support. Without the decade, we would not be having a network of early career professionals, so which has expanded rapidly, and it's offering connections that bypasses our rigid hierarchies as we know them. It has improved cross-country collaboration, that one we know, and increased literacy across different levels. Policy, education, and public participation has improved. So perhaps most importantly, at this point, we start seeing African-led programs begin to emerge for the decade. These were not just adaptation of external agenda, but initiatives that were shaped by Africa ourselves. And for the first time, we're seeing Africa beginning to organize itself as an ocean region rather than a collection of disconnected national efforts. So for me, the Ocean Decade was not just about adding more projects, but it's about really experimenting with coordination at a bigger scale. It has invited Africa to, or rather, it has invited us to see ourselves differently, not just participants waiting to be invited. So for a long time, we've been sitting waiting for somebody else to invite us to be part of the ocean science. The decade has given us an opportunity to lead and improve our coordination. So a lot of that has changed really in the last 5 years alone. So by 2025, I got this data from the Decade website, just to try and understand what steps or progress has Africa made. And by 2025, we see that the impact has now started shifting and things are becoming measurable. So more than 24% of all decade actions are operating now in Africa. And this is important because it's signaling an important increase in engagement. By 2022, I think we had just 2 or 3 decade actions. Now we're talking about 24 actions. So Africa really, the decade has helped us to increase our engagement, establish coordination structures. We have shifted from just being participants to starting to set the agenda, which is something important, and transforming things beyond numbers, okay? And I think this shift has now helped us as Africa to be understood globally. And now we're not asking ourselves, how do we fit in the global framework? We are now sort of thinking of how do we align? So the decade has helped us to question ourselves and say, how do we fit to, how do we align? And so this underscores the transformation that is very important, especially of a changing mindset in Africa. So instead of just measuring number of projects and number of workshops and funding that we've received, we are becoming more and more involved in the conversation. And I think that is, for me, is an important outcome of this decade. Just five years after, and we're seeing this great, change. And I think one of the things that is very outstanding is, of course, the rise of the ECOPS. This is an important generational shift in ocean science. I think it's one of the most powerful stories of Ocean Decade in Africa, as the rise of the early career professionals. So historically, Africa marine science is often operated in very rigid hierarchies, limited mobility, heavy donor dependence, and isolated environment institutions. Today's ECOPS, we know, represent a generational shift. What we are seeing now is scientists who are more digital, networked, interdisciplinary, and collaborative. I think this is the opportunity that Africa has. The ACOPs, most of you are here. You have an entrepreneurial mindset. You're globally connected than or former scientists. But more crucially, the ACOPs are not restricted by institutional borders. That we had, like in many cases, across. You can work across countries, sectors, and disciplines. I think one of the things I've seen, because at WIOMSA, is that now our membership of 1,200 scientists, close to 70% are ACOPs. So what I've seen is that ACOPs can move faster than our institutions. And this is important for ocean science and economy, because this, for me, is where the future of ocean science lies. And so even as we continue building capacity, one thing that we must remember is that Africa has now a huge potential that needs to be tapped. Our ocean resources, the oil, the gas, the minerals exist, but what we have that is important for Africa is the people. Okay, specifically a generation that is fluent in complexity and connectivity. The challenge but ahead is that whether our institutions evolve quickly to harness this energy, or whether they will attempt to maintain the outdated structure. Sorry, there's a bit of noise in the background. I hope it's not interfering with the sound. Yeah, so for me, this is the greatest evolution that has happened to Africa, and I think we need to really look at this as something we need to take advantage of. But as I said, there are a lot of still uncertainties that we have. But the best group that can deal with uncertainty are the ACOPs. I don't know if it's the ACOP or the ACOPs. I always confuse. It's early career ocean professionals, so it's ACOPs. So Africa's ACOPs, I think, is a generation that has potential to become resilient, because you guys already operate under a lot of uncertainty. You can innovate under different constraints, collaborate across borders, as I've said, and you're less trapped by legacy systems. Okay, so as we experience changing times and more uncertainty in our ocean environment, I think Africa's hope is the young people who are more resilient and more adaptive to the changes. Disruptions like funding and all these that is happening globally now can be disruptive, but we have to think of new ways as ACOPs on how we can adapt to these changing realities. So I think this is one of the achievements of the decade, if you ask me, for Africa. Of course, progress has been made, but we still see quite a bit of gaps. As I said, 24% of endorsed decade actions were from Africa. The last 5 years have been a great achievement, but the problem still is that most of the programs that have been endorsed are still from Indian Ocean and the South Atlantic. So we are seeing very little of North Africa and the upper part of the Atlantic, that is the West Africa going north. So in as much as we are 24% Africa endorsed actions, a good number of these, nearly 20 of them, are found in the Indian Ocean region. That's on the west side of Africa. So we're still not evenly distributed in terms of capacities and our involvement in the decade. And that is something that we need to change. Our leadership is still very weak. We host, out of these 20 plus actions, we host very few of them. No, we host most of them, but we don't lead most of them. So that's another problem. So while we host many programs and actions, the leadership is still from the north. So again, we still need to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why are we not taking leadership in some of these actions that have been endorsed? We are seeing still Africa endorsed actions being led by countries like US, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Australia, which is not a problem. But then we may end up finishing the decade when we've not led in the decade. We are hosts, basically. We play host, but we don't lead. So the point we want to make and emphasize now is let people come to build with us, not for us. At the moment, we are moving forward, but the science is still being built for us. It's not as it's not being built with us. And I think that is something that we need to think about. As I said, distribution across Africa of decade actions is uneven. We see, even in terms of ocean science output, we see our countries like South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Morocco, Nigeria, Cabo Verde, Madagascar, and Angola leading in areas of ocean literacy, blue carbon, ocean observation, marine pollution, climate science. But the rest of Africa is not visible. Well, they're visible, but they're not really producing the science. So I talked about visibility. We do a lot of activities, we do a lot of workshops, meeting, conferences. But the more important part is what products are coming out of those activities, and how is the science used, and how is it driving innovation? So that is still a problem. So while you might see a lot of science conferences, activities, projects happening in Africa, what I'm saying here is those tangible outputs and their impact on African oceans is not being felt. So let us not mistake activity for transformation. And that is what we need to change as Africa. So again, if you look at the way we are participating in the decade, we are sort of more involved in 3-decade challenges. That is marine ecosystems and biodiversity, climate solutions, skills, knowledge, and participation. What about the other 7 challenges? We are completely missing out as Africa. So what is the problem, and what do we need to do? So as I said, while we are making progress, we are still seeing quite a bit of gaps. And I think that is something that bothers me quite a lot. Yeah, but as I said, it's not all doom. By 2021, Africa participation was scattered. By 2025, the distribution increased. So we are seeing more regional coordination, especially in the Western Indian Ocean region. Africa Task Force has been established and it's growing strong. We have a Decade Coordination Center. I talked about the ACOP networks. We are seeing a lot of co-design programs across regions, regional roadmaps, cross-country collaborations. Examples of programs that are running now include the SEAWARD, that is led by the Africa Decade Task Force, and many other programs. So we are now shifting from isolated individual projects to more coordinated Africa-wide programs. In some regions like the Western Indian Ocean, we are seeing scientists working closely together. So this is a study that we did of the Western Indian Ocean region by looking at a grant that we call MASMA, the Marine Science for Management Grant, and how the publications that came out of the grant, how scientists who were involved in this research work in the last 30 years have been collaborating. So we see that in the last 3 decades, the network of collaboration is changing fast. So that is an indicator that we are beginning to work more closely as scientists, but this is still within national or regional context. We need to expand this now to Africa as a whole. Yeah, so as I end up my presentation, I think my key message is that for Africa, let us not confuse momentum as transformation. We could be moving, but not transforming, okay? As I've said, you've seen all the gaps that we are still facing, leadership, funding, infrastructure, despite the reported progress. We still have fragmented systems, limited policy uptake, risk of reproducing old patterns. We have not transformed our institutions a lot. Some of them still remain, operate the way they operated like 30, 40 years ago. And there's need for deep governance. So despite the real progress, this slide really shows us that, we have momentum, but let us not mistake this for transformation. So as we continue reporting our progress in the ocean decade, we still have low representation in global leadership roles. major funding gaps, as I said, unequal access to infrastructure. Long-term financing is weak, data systems are fragmented, and policy uptake is limited. I think the biggest problem that we need to overcome is dependence on external institutions that has been running for the last many years. And perhaps the most dangerous is our systems still tend to reward activity more than change. So we keep rewarding activity more than change. We rank ourselves on the number of papers we've published, but we're not seeing change. So it does not matter how many publication or science conferences we attend if we're not transforming, if we're not changing. If there are too many meetings, too many pilot projects, too many disconnected initiatives, that is still a problem. Okay. While institutional redesign still lags behind. So I think transformation requires that we move beyond what is visible, measurable, towards a deeper change in governance, incentives, and power distribution. So we must move from just like the butterfly. I like this, I use it a lot when I talk about transformation. We are still stuck in the caterpillar mode, okay? We need to get out of the caterpillar mode and fly, okay? So that is how I always describe our science. We are still in the caterpillar mode, but we need to be flying now like the rest of the world. So what must happen, finally? The next 5 years are very important. That will be the end of the decade. So what must we do? We must accelerate several interconnected projects. We must move towards connection, improve regional coordination, taking precedence over isolated national projects. We have to build our ocean intelligence system, strengthen data sharing, sustain knowledge, digital infrastructure. Our ECOP leadership must be strengthened so that we see our youths leading more, not just participating, but lead. Science policy integration must improve, must ensure that knowledge shapes decisions faster and more effectively. But also important is the local legitimacy must be strengthened by making communities co-designers rather than recipients. Finance remains a big issue, so financing systems must evolve beyond donor dependency towards a more blended domestic models. Finally, Africa to Africa collaboration must be the norm. And I want to conclude by saying the future of ocean science is not regional. The future of Africa science is regional. It's not about fragmented systems. So that will be my final slide. And yeah, I've just talked about this. Let's build institutions that are able to respond to the current needs. Let's have an African vision about science. And more importantly, let's redesign our systems to respond to the needs of the 21st century thinking. So I will stop at that point. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Alta. That was such an amazing presentation. The last part, most importantly, is about designing our solutions and initiatives to cater for the 21st century or modern day problems. It's a big issue, especially for the youth. Currently, there are a lot of modern day challenges or issues that are of global concern. You can, of course, now the gender issues are there. There's the climate change, big deal. There's the global conflict happening. So there's the AI, sort of like the biggest. So these are all, issues of global concern and modern day challenges that whenever we are designing our initiatives or solutions, even taking it all the way back to our academic institutions, the curriculums and all of that, they need to really cater for these modern day challenges and problems that they pose. So I really do agree with that, and I've learned a lot. So is there any questions? Does anyone have any questions, any comments? If you raise your hands, I can also give you the floor to speak. Introduce yourself and let us know what you think or if you have any questions. Okay. Not sure if we have any questions or comments from the audience. But yeah, if there are no questions or comments, then I think we are due in time and we can end the webinar. Unless, Dr. Otter, you have any other additional remarks?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll share the presentation if people want to look at it further. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any further remarks. I think for me, the most important thing is, when you talk about the decade of ocean science, we have a very short time to make change as Africa. So the decade is 1,000 days away to end. If you just to bring it to your attention, it's not going to be there forever. It was a decade that was supposed to give us a momentum to institute change in Africa. The question is, what will we be talking about in 2030 as Africa? What will have changed? As ACOPS, I want to challenge you. What will you be able to change in the remaining 1,000 days to the end of the 2030? What will you be remembered for? So when you talk about the decade, it's not about somebody else coming from outside to sort our problems. No. We have to think of, how do we resolve these problems? Because every time I talk to our scientists and everybody else, and I say, why are we not changing? The first problem that they'll mention to you is funding. I say, no, it's not funding. In some cases, you even give the funds and nothing happens. Many times, we are a funding agency as well. So we give money for research, but I can tell you that money is not the problem. Okay, the problem is we have ideas that we're not putting into use. We have developed a very high dependency syndrome, so we cannot move without somebody else holding our hands. We don't like experimenting with our own ideas and programs. So we're still stuck in some kind of, that's why I always call it the caterpillar mode. That's a term that I keep using every time. Our science is still in the caterpillar mode, the larvae. We have refused to rapture and fly. And if this decade we don't make some disruptive change, it will end with us going back to where we were 10, 20 years ago. And so I struggle with that problem as Wyomsa, because in my region, the West Indian Ocean region, the number of young scientists is growing. But I still see we are still kind of stuck in the old ways of doing things. Okay. I know. And they'll say, oh, we don't have resources, we don't have all these. Sorry, there was something passing by, so I had to meet. But I want to challenge us that we need to break that trap. Okay. We need to think of how to break that trap. Science and research can pay for itself. That's what I think. But we need to start somewhere by thinking of, how do we do it? Because what we see is that everybody sits back and says there's no funding. So what happens when there's no funding? We don't do any research. We just sit back. Okay. So that's a problem that I'm seeing, and that the money must come from somewhere else, the north. Okay. So what happens if we don't receive money in the next 5 years? Does it mean that we are going to just sit back and wait as Africa? I mean, these are just thoughts that for you to think, to reflect and think about. What if all the money for research disappears from Africa, as it is now currently happening? Then what? Are we going to sit back and just say, all right, no money, no research? and yet we've been trained as researchers, as scientists, and there are no jobs. That's the truth. Our research institutions are not employing anymore. Why? Because they're government-based, and governments in many countries have stopped recruitment. So what does that mean, really, for the future of ocean science in Africa? So these are just reflections. So I think ECOPS must take up this challenge beyond just being a network of early career scientists. We will not be early career scientists forever. Think about that. In the next few years, you're no longer an ECOP. You are supposed to move and be a senior scientist. Others will come. All right. So what change will you have brought to science? So let's not just be a network for the sake of network. I would really like to see that transformational change. I know in my region, the wheel, our ECOPs are doing a great job. But what we've not seen is moving out of the network thinking into actually creating change. Okay. And I want to end on that note, because I just want to throw it back to you as a challenge, because the three things that are for sure are going to happen. Number one, research funding is dwindling for science. That's globally, that's not just in the world. Number two, the number of early career graduates, whether it's in science or any other field, is growing. Number three, science is needed for our blue economy transformation and growth. How do we bring all that together to move things forward? So thank you very much for your time and for inviting me to this session.
I think there are two questions. So the first one, I think, David, if you would want to maybe mention yourself or throw light on it, you are allowed to talk. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Tudor, for the nice presentation, and it's a nice call mostly for the ECOPS, especially on this World Ocean Day. My question is quickly on policy. We have seen a lot on policies that are happening in the ocean space, especially in the African continent, like the High Seas Treaty. This year, early in January, it got ratified. It's currently in action, and I just wanted to understand, like, how would early careers, especially ECO, take actions in pushing for policies such as the BBNJ policy in the African perspective, in any other ocean-related policy? Thank you.
Thank you. What is the other question so that I answer both at the same time?
Sorry, the other question is I don't know who is an anonymous person, but the person asked, there has been great hubs established for ECOPS across Africa that are change oriented. How can Africa Ocean Decade Task Force embrace such energy from ECOPS initiatives and making them leading the change we all wanted to see in our institutions and ocean science in Africa?
Great, thanks. I think those are good questions. And let me start with the second one. Yeah, so there's sorry, there's a guy passing here making a lot of noise. Let him pass. Okay, he's gone. Fine. So the first question was BBNJ. The second one was the decade, how can the decade task force and how can ECOPS be involved? I think the second question is, for me, is the most important way to really get involved. So the task force was put together. Let's understand what was the task force purpose. Why was it established? Number one, the task force was established as a way of actually strengthening collaboration across Africa and trying to bring together all the decade actions and projects to sort of speak to each other. Okay. At the moment, even though we have 24 actions, they're still operating independently. And what we've not achieved as a task force is to see how to bring all these programs into one kind of system for Africa. Because I think the ECOPS can operate not independently on their own as such, but how do we become part of already existing programs. So I'll give you an example. Wyomsa runs a program that we call the MACOP, the Marine Conservation Program at Wyomsa. One of the things we've done with that program, it's an endorsed decade action, is to make sure that it is run and operated by an ECOP. Okay. So the first thing is that we don't want to see you guys sitting back and waiting for lack of a better word, handouts. Okay. We want to see more programs in the region, in Africa, that have been endorsed, actually being led by the ECOP. So you can establish all those nodes and all those structures. But for me, those are still, you're still focusing so much on visibility. If you remember my slide on visibility versus building resilience. So a lot of our initiatives are about creating visibility. We want more structures. We want more, workshops, more nodes. Those are okay. But at the end of the day, those structures don't transform us. So my challenge to you, and if you ask me, how do you get involved in the Decade Task Force? The Decade Task Force is a framework to help bring together the different actions in the region, number one. Number two, it's also there to connect different parts of Africa. And the nodes are important. But my way of answering you is that let us be involved in, the right question for me would be, how are we already involved in the actions that are happening now? Okay, because there are 24 actions. How many of those actions actually involve ECOPs? That's a question we should be asking ourselves. So of the 24 actions, how many are led by ECOPs? How many have integrated ECOPs? So if these 24 are running and ECOPs has not identified its role in all these, then we still have a problem. It does not matter how many nodes or how many networks we are going to create. We'll end up 2030, and the achievement we'll have realized is creating more networks and more nodes. So I want to throw back the question as a challenge back to you, that of the 24 endorsed decade actions, how many are currently running, and how many of these have got ECOPs as not as participants, but as actually driving these actions? So as I gave an example of Wyomsa, the MACOP program, one of the things we've ensured as Wyomsa is to give it to somebody who is probably still in the early career stage to run it, and to ensure that all the grants that we're giving for projects integrate early career scientists at all levels. So there has to be a way that programs are structured to enable that to happen. The task force for me is basically just like a governance system. But what is more important is the real actions and how ECOPs are involved. So one of the things ECOPs must do is to map out all these 24 actions that are already happening, and then just identify where can we get involved and how. Okay. So let me mute a little bit again. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm sitting somewhere in Priding. Priding is where the Ocean Conference is going to happen next week. So we had a meeting today, so I just found some corner to do a meeting, and it's all bloody noisy here. Anyway, so that's my first question. On BB&J, David, Elas, I think I bring it back again as a question to you. And it's answered by what I answered first. So all these policy frameworks are coming, whether it's BB&J, whether it's the CBD, whether it's the Paris Agreement, whether there's so many global policy agendas. Even before we jump to BB&J, how involved in the ones that are closer to us? How are we implementing the CBD 30 by 30 policy? What is our role as young people? The climate policies, all these policies. The BB&J is okay, but it's just another layer of policies among the many that we have. So for me, it's not just about the BB&J alone, which is even more complex. Even most of us still don't understand what it is. But how are we involved in the ones closer to us? Because we must start by getting more involved in what is already being implemented within our countries. Of course, get involved in BB&J at different levels, but that's an evolving policy that we need to be part of the evolution. We don't need to sit back and say how. it's where do we get involved now? Okay, so these are difficult questions, I would say, but for me, the challenge is that my presentation focused on was, how do we break this trap of, okay, the policies are on, how do we get in as ECOPs? No, there's a lot that is already happening. And for me, the question would be, how are we already involved in the national policies themselves, leave alone Africa, our own national policies? I know, David, for sure, you are a strong policy guy, and you're coming to participate in the Ocean Congress, which is good. And I like, you're a good example of how you're already involved as an ECOP by helping your country, move some agenda forward. So excellent. I wish you could make a presentation to your fellows next time how you've been able to do this and work with institutions like WIOMSA and others to push an agenda, national agenda. And for me, that is already being involved. So I don't see any other way. It's basically what you've done, because I've been involved with you in this, and that's the involvement that we want to see. So I would suggest that next time you have a presentation to your fellows, how are you able to work with your government to bring the delegation to come and make a commitment at the Ocean Conference that is happening next week? You are part of it, I know, and you have a story to tell. So for me, that is the involvement already. And within those small spaces, you're able to influence change and drive an agenda. That is all. There's no other way to get involved other than to be part of an already existing program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are no more questions. And then also our time is up. But yeah, I mean, for those who would want to follow Dr. Alta, of course, the name Alta Tuda is on LinkedIn. You can follow, and then also you can follow the ECOP program. Should you also want to organize a webinar and present on a topic or your work sometime, feel free to send us an email or a message on LinkedIn, and I will connect you, or we would facilitate that process so that you can we can host you with the ECOP program. Thank you very much again, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation, and see you for those who are coming for our Ocean Conference in Mombasa. The venue is getting set. I'm right at the venue, and it's going to be a big conference. So looking forward to seeing you all next week, those who will be attending. Thank you.